I never wanted to write this down. I wanted to forget it, to pretend it never happened. But the truth, as horrifying as it is, refuses to be buried. I have no other choice now but to tell what I witnessed and what I heard under the frozen ground. It began in January of that year, in a northern village that most maps don't bother to mark. A place where the sun barely rises, and the snow falls in endless gray sheets that smother the landscape. I had arrived there for work, a surveyor documenting old cemeteries for a regional history project. My assignment was straightforward. Catalog the graves in the old northern cemetery, check for erosion, document names and dates. Simple, dry work until I found that part of the cemetery the locals avoided entirely. The village itself was nearly abandoned. Only a handful of families lived there year-round, mostly elderly. The younger generation had fled long ago. I rented a small cabin near the outskirts, a place so cold that the wind whistled through the walls like a chorus of mourners. The first night I slept there, I was awakened by a scratching noise outside my door. It was faint at first, almost a whisper. I told myself it was the wind, or perhaps a fox digging through the snow. But I had the uncanny sense that it was something deliberate, watching. The cemetery was older than the village itself. Moss-covered stones leaned in crooked rows, the inscriptions mostly eroded by time. I started at the southern end, where the ground was still solid, the snow thinner. The locals had warned me to stay clear of the northern section. "Don't dig there," one old man said. "The ground, it's angry." I laughed, thinking it a superstition, a story told to scare outsiders. I should have listened. I arrived at the northern end on the second day. Immediately, I felt the difference. The air was heavier, the snow seemed denser, and the silence. It was absolute, not the peaceful quiet of snow falling, but a suffocating silence, as if the world had swallowed sound itself. I started my survey, brushing snow from the stones, noting names and dates. Most were centuries old, soldiers, farmers, children lost to disease. Then I noticed something odd. A single grave, unmarked, the snow around it disturbed, as though someone had recently brushed it aside. The earth beneath was frozen solid, but there were faint depressions, like claw marks, etched into the surface. I knelt, my fingers trembling, trying to make sense of it. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, almost beneath the snow. A whisper, or perhaps a sigh, rising from the frozen ground itself. I froze. The sound was impossibly low, vibrating through my bones. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe my imagination, but then the whisper became clearer, a desperate, gurgling scream. Not one scream, but dozens, layered together, echoing beneath the frost. I scrambled back, my heart hammering, convinced I was imagining things. But the sound followed me, faint but persistent, a dreadful chorus beneath the soil. I returned to the cabin that night shaken. I tried to rationalize it, underground water flowing, ice cracking. But even as I lay in bed, I could hear it faintly, a whisper that felt alive, whispering my name. At first, I thought it was exhaustion. By the third night, I could no longer deny it. It was coming from the ground itself. And it wasn't just sounds. It was something watching, something waiting under the frozen earth. I tried asking the locals about it. Most avoided the topic entirely. One woman, her hands shaking as she poured me tea, muttered, "They say the earth takes what it is owed. The northern ground. It hungers. Don't dig. Don't listen. Stay away. Her eyes, wide and terrified, fixed on the distant cemetery. I pressed for more. She whispered screams. Beneath the ice. It never stops. Not for the living, not for the dead. I laughed again, a hollow, nervous sound. Ghost stories. Northern superstition. But even as I said it, my stomach churned. That night, the scratching returned, louder this time, beneath the cabin floor. A rhythm, deliberate. Tap, 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 as if fingers were pressing against the boards from below. I had to see. I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar, and I lifted the floor panel in the corner of the cabin. Nothing. Only dirt, frozen solid. Yet the sound persisted, muffled beneath my feet. I began sleeping in the doorway, flashlight trained on the floor, every noise amplified in my terror. I couldn't leave. My work required me to continue the survey. So I returned to the northern cemetery, compelled by some mix of duty and dread. The air was colder than before. The snow hardened to glass under my boots. And then I saw it. Fresh marks in the snow, leading from the unmarked grave into the woods. Not footprints, but indentations deep enough to suggest something had dragged itself. Something, human but not. I followed the trail cautiously. It ended abruptly in a circle of trees. The snow there was churned, as if the earth itself had been ripped open. The air was pungent, metallic. I realized with horror that it smelled of blood, but ancient, decayed blood. I stumbled back, convinced I would never return. That night, the whispers became voices. Names. My name. The voices of children, men, women, all crying, all screaming under the frozen ground. I woke to see marks on the cabin wall, scratches I had not made, clawed deep into the wood, spelling out my name in jagged, freezing letters. I tried to flee the village, but the snowstorm had trapped me. And through the howl of wind, the whispers never stopped, never faded, a choir of the damned beneath the frozen earth. I write this now because I have no one else to tell. Whatever is under that cemetery, it is patient and it is aware. The frozen ground holds them, and it hungers. And I fear that one day it will call me beneath it too. The first week in the village ended with me teetering on the edge of panic. The whispers beneath the frozen ground had intensified into distinct, chilling voices, calling not only my name, but fragments of phrases I couldn't understand at first, like half-formed sentences from a language I didn't know, but somehow recognized. The scratching under the cabin floor had evolved into a rhythmic tapping, almost deliberate, as if whatever was beneath the earth was testing me, measuring my fear. I tried rational explanations. Frost shifting beneath the soil, water freezing and cracking. But rationality faltered quickly. One night, I was certain I saw movement in the snow outside the window. Shadows crawling along the surface, hunched and slow, dragging themselves in ways no human body could. Every time I blinked, the shadows disappeared. My mind screamed to me to leave, but the storm outside made flight impossible. By the second week, my work at the cemetery had become obsessive. I no longer surveyed the graves for history. I studied the ground, the snow, the anomalies. The northern section called to me, a lure I could not resist. Each day, I ventured further, my boots crunching across hardened snow, my breath fogging in icy clouds that seemed thicker than the cold should allow. It was on the fourth day that I first saw them. Figures, crouched and motionless, just beneath the surface of the snow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the low sun glinting off the ice, but they were too distinct. Pale, almost translucent, human-like, with faces frozen in silent, eternal screams. I fell back, tripping over the snow and hitting my shoulder on a gravestone. When I looked again, the figures were gone. Only the snow remained, unbroken, as if nothing had been there at all. That night, sleep became impossible. I tried to journal, to ground myself, but my hands trembled too violently. The whispers continued beneath the cabin, louder, pleading, screaming, crying. I began hearing scratching at the walls, faint at first, then insistent, circling the room like claws tracing my skin through the wood. The floorboards groaned, the walls shivered, and beneath it all, the whispers coalesced into words I could almost understand. Come, come down, join us, frozen forever. I vomited that night, shivering, sweat mixing with frost on my skin. I began keeping a small hammer by my bedside, ready to defend myself against whatever might rise from the floor. My rational mind knew it was impossible, but a primal terror told me otherwise. There was something in the frozen ground, beneath the snow, alive in ways that made no sense, and it was aware of me. The fifth day brought the first visible sign of movement in the northern cemetery. I had been tracing the unmarked grave, noting the clawed depressions, when I saw the snow ripple, as though something beneath it were shifting. And then, slowly, the snow began to collapse inward, forming a shallow pit, and a hand emerged, pale, thin, its fingers twisted unnaturally, breaking the snow like paper. I stumbled back in horror, tripping over the gravestones. The hand paused as if testing the air before retreating beneath the snow again. My rational mind screamed at me that I had imagined it, but I had seen it. And then a voice, clear, guttural, human yet alien, "Don't leave. We need you." I ran back to the cabin that night, my mind fraying with every step. The whispers followed, louder now, urgent, chaotic, like a choir of madness beneath the frozen ground. I barricaded the door with furniture, hammered nails into the panels, anything to keep the unseen at bay. But sleep offered no relief. I began dreaming of the dead beneath the snow, faces pressed against the ice, clawing, crying, mouths open in silent screams. And when I woke, I found deep scratches across my arms, as if someone or something had left them while I slept. By the seventh day, I had stopped speaking to the villagers. Any attempt to explain what I was experiencing was met with silent stares, fear in their eyes, and warnings I could no longer decipher. I began documenting everything obsessively: the scratches, the noises, the faces in the snow. My journals grew into long, trembling accounts of what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had felt. But writing could not contain it. It only made the experience more real. It was on the eighth day that the screaming began. Not beneath the snow, but through it. A deep, resonant sound that shook the ground, echoing through the trees and across the frozen cemetery. I froze, chest heaving, as the snow around the unmarked grave began to rise and fall, as though the earth beneath it were breathing. And then I saw them, dozens of pale figures, faces twisted in eternal terror, rising partially from the snow, as if the ground itself were vomiting up the dead. I could hear their voices distinctly now, calling my name, chanting in a rhythm I couldn't resist. Join us. Come ander. Be frozen. Forever. I ran, stumbling blindly through the snow, back toward the cabin. The voices followed, echoing in the wind, in my ears and my mind. When I reached the cabin, I slammed the door and barricaded it, shaking violently. The scratching at the floor had become pounding. My cabin seemed to tremble, as if the frozen earth itself were attempting to break in. I began to see them everywhere, in the trees, in the shadows, in the snowdrifts. Faces pressed against the ice of frozen ponds, eyes staring at me, screaming silently. I realized then that the northern cemetery, the frozen ground itself, was not merely a resting place. It was a prison, a place that held something vast and ancient, a hunger that reached upward through the frost, seeking the living to join the chorus beneath. By the 10th day, I could no longer tell if the whispers were real or hallucinations. I had begun speaking to them in whispers in the hopes that keeping communication might keep me safe. And yet, every time I did, the pounding grew louder, more insistent, the shadows more visible, the cold more unbearable. My hands shook constantly. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the cabin, once a shelter, felt like a coffin, sealing me above the chorus of the damned. I knew I was losing my mind, and yet a part of me, the part that had followed the whispers to the northern cemetery, that had seen the clawing hands beneath the snow, that had heard the voices calling my name, knew that I had no choice but to return. There was something I had to see, something I had to understand, something under the frozen ground that demanded acknowledgement, or it would come for me. And so I prepared. The snowstorm showed no sign of letting up. The villagers were silent, fearful, unhelpful. But I gathered my tools, my journals, my flashlight. I had decided that tomorrow I would return to the northern cemetery at dawn. I would confront whatever lay beneath the frozen ground, no matter the cost. I don't know if that decision was bravery or madness. Perhaps both. But as I write this, the whispers echo faintly through the floorboards, and I feel them, patient and waiting, beneath my feet. And I know that what lies under the frozen earth is aware. It is hungry, and it has begun to call for me. I awoke before dawn that morning, the cabin shivering with cold, my breath steaming in ragged clouds as I packed my equipment. The snowstorm had eased slightly, leaving a brittle, glassy crust across the village. The silence outside was deceptive. It felt heavy, oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I trudged toward the northern cemetery, my boots crunching in a hollow rhythm across the frozen ground. The whispers followed, low at first, but growing louder with each step, circling me like a tide rising from the earth. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the unmarked grave. I had brought a small shovel and an ice pick, thinking perhaps, foolishly, that I could uncover the source of the voices beneath the frost. When I reached the grave, my heart sank. The snow around it was disturbed, churned into chaotic patterns as if something, or many somethings, had been moving beneath the surface. I knelt, pressing my hands to the ice, and felt a vibration, low at first, then growing stronger. The snow shivered beneath me, and suddenly a hand erupted through the surface, clawing toward me with unnatural speed. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the icy grave. And then came the first real scream. Not a whisper, not a voice in my head, but a bone-chilling, primal scream that seemed to emanate from every direction at once. It was raw, human, and yet impossibly alien, like thousands of voices trapped in a single, wailing cry. The ground shook beneath me, and I felt the frost crack, hairline fissures spreading like veins across the cemetery. I ran, not thinking, not rationalizing, just running. Behind me, the ground erupted in jagged upheavals, hands and faces clawing through the snow, frozen mouths screaming silently. The shapes were indistinct, horrifyingly human yet grotesquely malformed. Limbs twisted, faces elongated, eyes hollow and desperate. My mind screamed at me to flee, but my feet betrayed me, sinking into snow that had become ice-cold mud, as though the earth itself wanted to pull me under. I reached the cabin, slammed the door, and bolted it with every piece of furniture I could move. The pounding at the floor and walls began immediately. Not random, it was deliberate, coordinated, like a drumbeat calling me from beneath. The whispers returned, clearer now, almost intelligible. Join us. We've waited so long. You belong. You belong. I sank to the floor, trembling, trying to make sense of what I had seen. My rational mind shattered piece by piece. I had been prepared for folklore, superstition, the stories of a village lost in time. I had not been prepared for the dead, or what lay beyond them. What lived beneath the frozen ground was no longer human. It had become something monstrous, patient, eternal, and it wanted me. I tried to sleep. I could not. Every shadow in the cabin twisted into faces pressed against eyes, screaming silently. The tapping at the floor became clawing, dragging. I started hearing movement beneath the cabin itself, soft shuffles that grew louder with each passing hour. I could feel a presence under the floorboards, circling, waiting. I was not alone. By nightfall, I was convinced I would not survive. The voices whispered with urgency now, closer, as if the walls themselves were speaking. It's time. The frozen ground hungers. Come, join. I realized then that this was not just haunting. This was predation. The earth beneath the cemetery had become a living trap, a prison for something too old and hungry to remain buried. I remembered the villagers' warnings, the cryptic words I had dismissed, the northern ground. It hungers. I understood now. It had always hungered. It had waited centuries beneath the ice, patient, collecting, drawing the living toward it, whispering promises of immortality, of joining the chorus beneath the frost. The next morning, driven by a mixture of terror and curiosity, I returned to the cemetery. The air was frigid, the snow compacted and crystalline. The unmarked grave seemed different, alive. The snow shifted subtly, breathing, expanding, and contracting as though it were lunging toward me. I knelt, placing my hands on the frozen surface. The ground pulsed beneath my fingers, and suddenly the ice shattered. A face emerged, pale, wet, frozen tears streaking down sunken cheeks. Mouth open in a scream that I could feel as much as hear. I recoiled, stumbling back, and the ground erupted fully. Shapes, dozens of them, clawed their way free. Some had only partial faces, eyes dangling, limbs twisted unnaturally. Others were more intact, but all were screaming, silent or audible, reaching for me. I turned and ran, but the snow itself seemed to resist, clinging to my boots, pulling at my legs as if trying to drag me into the frozen pit. Back at the cabin, I barricaded the doors and windows once more. I could feel them under the floor now, just beneath the thin wooden boards. Scratches, taps, shuffles, each movement deliberate, almost playful in its malice. I realized, with sickening clarity, that I could not escape. Not physically, not mentally. The frozen ground had claimed me already. It had been calling, whispering, and I had answered. I try to record what I had seen to document it all. My journals are filled with frantic entries, sketches of malformed faces, maps of clawed snow, desperate pleas to any reader who might survive this tale. I wrote the names I heard whispered, fragments of words I couldn't translate, and notes on the pulsating, breathing ice that seemed almost sentient. The nights were worse. Shadows pressed against the windows, mimicking human shapes, sometimes forming figures I recognized from the cemetery, children, men, women, all reaching toward me. The tapping at the floor became pounding. The whispers turned to chants. I began to hallucinate, seeing faces pressed into walls, mouths opening impossibly wide, screaming. The cabin felt alive, a conduit between me and the frozen earth outside. I tried to flee. I packed what I could, but the snowstorm had returned with a vengeance. Paths were blocked, visibility zero, and as I struggled to navigate the landscape, I felt the ice under my feet pulse again, a rhythm I recognized now. Deliberate. The frozen ground was moving beneath me, shaping the snow, drawing me back toward the northern cemetery. I realized then that the cemetery, the unmarked grave, the frozen ground itself, was not a place, it was an entity. It was patient, ancient, and aware. It had waited for me, had whispered through centuries, through the voices of children long dead, to draw the living into its chorus beneath the ice. And I was already ensnared. By the end of that third week, I had stopped speaking to anyone. I could no longer differentiate between waking and dreaming. Every sound, every shadow, every vibration in the snow or floor felt like a message, a call, a lure. The entity beneath the frozen ground had begun to teach me its language, its rhythm, its hunger. I understood now what the villagers had meant. The northern ground was angry. It was patient. It was alive. And it had chosen me. I do not know what awaits me. I write this as a warning to anyone who might follow in my steps. Do not go to the northern cemetery. Do not disturb the frozen ground. Do not listen to the whispers. For once you do, it begins. And once it begins, there's no turning back. The frozen earth hungers, and it is patient. Eternally patient. The fourth week was the worst. The snowstorm outside showed no mercy, trapping me in the cabin, but it hardly mattered. The real storm, the one that gnawed at my mind and body, was beneath the frozen ground. The entity was no longer content to whisper or tap at the floor. It demanded engagement, and I could feel it moving, alive, beneath every inch of ice and earth surrounding the village. That morning, I awoke to the floor trembling beneath me, not subtly, but violently, like the heartbeat of a creature enormous and patient. The scratching was no longer random. It followed a rhythm, syncopated, purposeful, growing louder in pulses that reverberated through my chest. I pressed my ear to the floor, and the voices beneath it spoke in unison, a chorus of desperate pleading and rage. Come. Join. Beneath. Frozen. Forever. Cool me. I could no longer tell if the words were in my head or resonating through the wood, but it did not matter. Fear had replaced logic, leaving only instinct. I had to confront whatever lay beneath or be driven mad by it. I grabbed my shovel, crowbar, and flashlight and stumbled into the blizzard toward the northern cemetery. Visibility was near zero. The wind shrieked like a living thing, howling through the skeletal trees. But I followed the pull of the whispers, which seemed to guide me, rhythmically tugging at my consciousness. The unmarked grave awaited, a dark void in the crystalline snow. When I reached it, the ice over the ground trembled violently, and the whispers became screams. The snow rose and fell as though the earth itself breathed, and then the surface split open with a sound like cracking bone. I froze, heart hammering. From the churning snow emerged dozens of figures, grotesque and twisted, screaming, clawing at the air. Some faces were partially frozen, others intact, all contorted in eternal agony. I swung my shovel wildly, but it passed through nothing. They were not corporeal, at least not entirely, but they were there. They pressed against me, a wave of cold, a pressure of desperate hunger. Their screams merged into one low, droning chant, calling my name, calling for me to join them beneath the ice. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the fissure that had opened beneath the unmarked grave. Then the earth moved again, not slowly, not naturally. It rose, forming shapes, twisting the snow and ice into a grotesque semblance of a human figure, but larger, taller, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated, its mouth a vertical gash in the pale, frozen face. It raised one hand, pointing at me. A whisper slithered into my mind. Come. It is time. I ran, but the snow resisted. Every step became a struggle. The frost itself seemed to cling to my boots, pulling me toward the northern cemetery. Shadows twisted around me, forming faces I recognized, faces of the villagers, faces of long-dead children from the cemetery, all reaching toward me, all silent, all screaming. Back at the cabin, I tried to barricade myself again, but the pounding had intensified beyond reason. Floorboards splintered under invisible force, walls vibrated, windows cracked. I could see faint outlines moving beneath the snow outside, figures partially frozen, crawling, waiting. And in that moment, I realized something that froze me more than the cold. They were not limited to the cemetery. The frozen ground extended beneath the village, beneath my cabin, beneath everything. It was everywhere, patient, eternal, waiting for any soul foolish enough to listen. That night, the whispers became voices of authority, commanding me. You cannot hide. You belong. Cool me. The air in the cabin thickened, heavy with frost and decay. I could see my breath, but it no longer felt like air. It felt like something tangible pressing against my lungs, suffocating me. The scratching had become clawing. Something beneath the floor shifted with intention, searching, probing, and I could feel its presence through the soles of my feet. In a desperate attempt to buy time, I dug a small pit in the cabin floor, hoping to distract it, to channel its attention downward. I thought, I hoped, that it might be satisfied temporarily. The ground beneath the pit pulsed in response, and the whispers became a roar. Not enough. Not enough. Join. Now. Sleep came briefly, if it can be called that, but nightmares consumed me. I saw myself sinking into the frozen ground, faces pressing through the ice above me, hands pulling me down, chanting in unison, forever. Frozen. With us. I awoke drenched in sweat and blood, though I could not recall hurting myself. The cabin was silent, deceptively calm, but the air smelled of something metallic, old, and decayed. I knew the entity had not left. It had only paused, gathering strength, preparing for its final call. The following day, I decided I could no longer approach the cemetery directly. I tried to dig into the snow around the cabin instead, attempting to understand the depth and reach of the frozen earth. As I dug, the ground beneath me shifted violently, splitting open like the crust of some ancient leviathan. From the fissures emerged not only the figures of the dead, but shapes I could not comprehend, limbs bent impossibly, torsos elongated, faces fused into masks of agony. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the chasm. The whispers now were screams, clear and unmistakable. We are endless. You cannot escape. Beneath the frozen ground, I retreated into the cabin, barricading myself once again. But the barricades were useless. Floorboards splintered, walls shivered, windows rattled. The entity was patient, intelligent, and relentless. I realized, with growing horror, that it was teaching me something, not just fear, but inevitability. It was showing me that resistance was meaningless, that the frozen ground claimed all who listened, all who saw, all who heard. By the end of part 4, I had ceased all attempts at logic. I wrote frantic entries in my journal, sketches of twisted faces, maps of clawed snow, desperate pleas to anyone who might survive this account. The frozen ground had become my reality, and I could feel it beneath me constantly. The whispers never stopped, the clawing never ceased, and the shadows outside my cabin windows moved with purpose, watching, waiting. I understood now that there would be no escape. The entity beneath the frozen ground was patient, eternal, and aware. It had chosen me, drawn me into its chorus, and there would be no end. All that remained was surrender, or joining the endless, frozen screams beneath the earth. Tomorrow, I would face it directly, descend into the unmarked grave, confront the source of the frozen horror. Whether I survive or write these words from beneath the ice, I do not know. But the end is near. The frozen ground is patient, and it is calling. I write this from what may be my last conscious moments. The cabin no longer feels like a refuge. It is merely a threshold, a fragile barrier between the frozen world above and the unspeakable chorus beneath. I have long stopped thinking in terms of survival. There is only the entity, the frozen ground itself, and the inevitability of what it demands. The morning of my final descent, the air was still, deceptively quiet. Even the storm that had raged for weeks seemed to pause, as though the world were holding its breath. I forced myself outside, shivering violently, shovel and crowbar in hand, every step a battle against both the snow and the terror that gripped my mind. The northern cemetery awaited, the unmarked grave now more than a hole. It was a gaping maw, pulsating beneath the snow, alive. As I approached, the snow around the grave began to shift, not with wind, but with motion beneath. Pale hands broke through the surface, clawing desperately, dragging themselves toward me. Faces pressed against the snow, eyes wide with frozen terror, mouths open in silent screams. I staggered back, heart hammering, the ground beneath my boots vibrating like the pulse of some ancient creature. Then the ground erupted, not slowly, violently, with a force that threw me to the snow. Figures surged from the ice, grotesque and malformed. Some were human enough to recognize, others entirely alien in shape. Limbs twisted at impossible angles, faces fused into masks of agony, eyes empty but aware. Their silent screams pressed into my mind, a chorus of despair that clawed at my sanity. And then I heard it, the source, a voice deep and resonant, unlike anything human, yet somehow layered with the echoes of every voice that had been trapped beneath the frozen ground for centuries. Come, join us, beneath the frost, forever. I tried to run, but the snow itself resisted, clinging to my legs, pulling me toward the unmarked grave. The air thickened, frost forming along my eyelashes, icicles piercing my skin. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. The entity beneath the earth was not just alive, it was aware, intelligent, and patient. It had been waiting, learning, drawing me to this moment for weeks. I fell on my knees at the edge of the grave, staring into the churning snow. The frost cracked, fissures spreading like veins, and a form emerged, taller than any human, its limbs impossibly long, its face a vertical gash of screaming mouths stacked one above another. Eyes that should not exist stared into mine, piercing, consuming. Its presence radiated hunger, despair, eternity. I felt my mind begin to fracture under the weight of it. I tried to scream. The wind swallowed my voice. I tried to swing my shovel, my crowbar, but they passed through nothing as though striking air. The snow erupted around me again, pulling at my legs, wrapping me in frost. Hands, countless hands, clawed at me from beneath, cold as ice, rough as bark, insistent. I could feel them prying, tugging, dragging. The voices beneath the ground roared in unison. Join us. Belong. Frozen. Forever. And then the cold hit me, not the ordinary cold, but something alive, penetrating my bones, freezing muscle and marrow. My movement slowed, my mind dulled. The world contracted into a single point. The unmarked grave, the frozen ground, the chorus beneath. I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. In a final, impossible act of desperation, I tried to dig my way out, clawing at the snow and ice, but the ground resisted. It pulled, twisted, and swallowed. I felt the weight of centuries, of every soul trapped beneath the frozen earth, pressing against me, clawing at me, merging with me. Their anguish became mine, their terror my own. And through it all, the entity whispered, patient and eternal, welcome to the frozen chorus. Forever. I am writing this now because I must. Perhaps someone will find it, though I know that is unlikely. Perhaps someone must know what lies beneath the northern cemetery, beneath the ice and snow. The frozen ground is not dead. It is patient. It hungers. And it waits. As I write these words, I feel it moving beneath me, shifting, pulling me closer to the unmarked grave. My hands are numb, my thoughts fragmented. I can hear every voice that has ever been trapped beneath the ice, chanting, calling, screaming. The ground pulses in rhythm with them, and I feel my consciousness slipping, merging with theirs, becoming part of the chorus. I see now what the villagers try to warn me about. The northern ground does not merely hold the dead. It collects, it waits, it consumes. Every generation, every soul that listens, that dares to see or hear it, becomes part of it. I'm already theirs. I can feel their hands inside me, their faces pressing against mine, mouths opening in silent screams that I cannot escape. I fear I will not finish this account. My strength fades with each moment. My vision narrows. I can hear only the pulse of the frozen ground, the chanting of the chorus, the inevitable drawing of myself into its depths. If anyone reads this, do not go there. Do not disturb the northern cemetery. Do not listen. The frozen ground is patient, eternal, and it hungers. It calls, and it does not forgive. I feel it now, lifting me, pulling me into the fissure, the unmarked grave, into the eternal frost. I am joining them, and the chorus will never end. And so I write my last words as a warning. The screams are beneath the frozen ground, and they are waiting for you.